Hi, my name is Andrew, and today I'm talking about what makes a good description. How do you make good descriptions? The first advice that I would give is that you should try to engage as many senses as possible. What did the heroes see? What did they hear? What did they smell? What did they feel? I also generally like to include dimensions, and you should feel free to use cardinal directions whenever you're describing things. You've been journeying after the scion of Orcus, demon prince of undeath, for the better part of a week through thick, hilly forests. The wind has been battering you throughout your trek, but grows still as you see part of a large black tower peek out through the nearby trees. As the narrow track widens into a clearing, great piles of stone blocks and scorched timbers cover the area. No plants grow among the ruins or within the clearing, and the ground is bare dirt with a thin layer of ash covering everything. The cawing of a crow breaks up the growing silence. A path has been cleared through the center of the ruins towards the base of the tower. It dominates the entire area and is easily 80 feet tall. A strong and pungent smell of decay and of burnt hair permeates throughout. The construction of the tower is odd, definitely not stone, but hard to make out at a distance. As you grow near, you realize the tower is made entirely of blackened and charred human bodies. Stacked one atop another, the bodies look totally drained of all moisture, and are little more than a thin layer of material wrapped around a skeleton. A slight rumbling can be heard, as the tower seems to literally move upwards. Although very slowly, not more than a millimeter every few seconds, the tower is indeed moving upwards. As it moves, more and more bodies appear from below, adding to the horrific construction. Around one side, a stairway made of carved stone leads downwards into a foul-smelling darkness. So in that description, I engaged 4 senses. I evoked strong and dark imagery that makes it very clear that this is a bad guy. I also ended at a very intentional spot, with a stairwell that leads downwards. I would probably then ask what order the party goes in, as I'm able to naturally transition to the actual dungeon. Now there are 2 ways that I like to do descriptions, either a verbose description, like I used earlier, or a bulleted list. I usually use those long verbose descriptions about once every session because they allow for a whole mental scene in the player's minds. You're painting a mental picture using all of the senses. Now these can be pretty exhausting if overused, so I would recommend that you don't over-describe stuff. No matter how good you are at describing things, there's a point where further detail is no longer useful, and it just becomes wasted effort. Additionally, if you're trying to describe an incredibly complicated layout, it may be easier just to use or create a visual aid, literally draw it out. Sometimes, describing things will only get you so far. How would you describe this image? As one ship following a second, while a third ship is sinking right off to the port, with a pair of rowboats circling around the sinking ship? Even that description is missing many details. It doesn't tell us how many people each ship has, or how big those ships are, how big the rowboats are, how far apart everything is. Sometimes you're just better off drawing it out on a grid. Now normally I prefer a bulleted list, with each item ordered by how obvious they are. If a player wants to stop and ask for more detail about one part, it's very natural for me to stop, add more details, and then continue on. It's also a lot better for areas with many different interactable objects or things to do. As a general rule of thumb, if I'm making up an area, I try to include at least 3 relevant details. When you are describing an area that has a lot going on, start by giving a small amount of detail about each thing. Here's an example. There's a room constructed of stone brick. It's 30 feet wide and 60 feet long. There's a large cage in the northeast corner. There's a stone statue in the center of the room. There are a set of double doors to the south of the room, and in front of the cage is a round table around which 3 orcs sit. If the players want more detail about any of those things, I can then elaborate and provide the more robust description. The statue depicts a dwarf in plate wielding a 2-handed axe. At the base of the statue is carved in Dwarvish, Sir Gwynex the Fearless. One thing that I would definitely suggest is that you be sure to mention if there are enemies in the room last, because the players will hyper-focus on that detail, and all of the other details will be totally forgotten. If I started with all of the orcs in the room, all of the other details would be in one ear and out the other. Another piece of advice when trying to come up with area description is to use a thesaurus. To some extent, I think it's the DM's job to employ uncommon verbiage. So I like to have NPCs use archaic formulations of speech. Instead of an NPC saying, "I want to go meet the king," I will usually have an NPC say something along the lines of, "I wish to treat with your sovereign." The players still generally understand what you mean, but by using this intentionally archaic formulation of speech, you are clearly evoking the fundamentally medieval world that your D&D game is set in. One thing that I like to do is that whenever you have a well-educated NPC, a friendly wizard or an evil necromancer, try using exclusively Latinate language. What do I mean by this? The modern English language is a complicated mashup of Anglo-Saxon, which is to say Germanic, and Norman, which is to say French words. French is a Romance language and has strong connections to Latin. So what I'll do is I will literally look up every single word that I think this well-educated NPC might say, and I will determine if it has a Germanic or a Latinate origin. The reason for this dichotomy is that Normans in medieval England were considered to be the upper class, while the peasants were all Anglo-Saxons. By choosing certain words over others, it will create a subtle effect on that NPC's tone. Most players will not be able to describe what it is that is happening, but they will subconsciously pick up on it. An example of what I mean is that an educated person would say planet, which has Greek origins, whereas a less well-educated person would say world, which has Germanic origins. I think overall that most players accept that in our medieval fantasy game, out-of-fashion speech is perfectly normal. Next thing I want to talk about in descriptions is cutscenes, because I love cutscenes. They are great at creating drama and tension. They are things that the players know that the characters do not, and they reinforce the idea that this is a game, right? Movies and video games often include cutscenes. Why not D&D? One major way that I employ cutscenes is that after a major battle, I will have a cutscene showing the players a glimpse of future villains plotting and scheming. A patented Abria Iyengar move is to do here's what you don't see. When a character rolls a perception check and fails, or if a character gets distracted at a crucial moment. Now, I've never experienced this personally, but a potential issue with cutscenes is that some players may try to use the limited information in the cutscenes to their advantage. They may try to game it. And the way I prevent that is that I just don't give the players any information in the cutscenes that are vitally important. The characters in them usually speak in code, so the players don't really understand what the dialogue means. And again, this has never really been an issue for me personally, but it's something that you might want to watch out for. Do you remember the description from earlier? Do you remember where I left off? That's right, with a stairwell that leads downwards. Ideally, you want to end your description with where you want the players to most immediately go. So, the stairwell that leads downwards. I don't want the players to spend a ton of time talking about what they're going to do about this necromancer, because ultimately, there's really only one thing to do, which is head down the stairs and confront him. You want to make sure that your descriptions lead the players in the direction that you want them to go without making it feel like they're being railroaded. In sum, evoking as many senses as possible while remaining brief in your descriptions will keep your players engaged. Using archaic language can help to set the tone of your game, while cutscenes can help build tension and drama and make your game feel much more cinematic. All of that said, thank you guys for watching. Peace out.